The frozen expanse of space yawned before them, a black void punctuated by distant pinpricks of starlight. Captain Elise Winters gripped the arms of her command chair, her knuckles white, as she stared grimly at the viewscreen. "They're not responding to our hails," reported her first officer, his voice laced with a mixture of frustration and concern. Elise's jaw tightened. "Launch the shuttles. We need to get them out of there." The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity as the crew leaped to obey her order. Elise watched with bated breath as the tiny craft detached from a human vessel and surged towards the drifting alien hulk. "Sensors show no life signs," the first officer announced, his face etched with grim realization. "They're all dead." Elise felt a chill run down her spine. "Keep trying to raise them. There has to be someone left alive." The minutes ticked by in agonizing silence, broken only by the occasional status update from the bridge crew. Elise's heart pounded in her ears as she waited, praying that against all odds, someone would answer their call. Finally, a crackle of static came over the comm. "This is Lieutenant Karina Sato of the Vanguard. We've found survivors." Elise let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Bring them aboard, Lieutenant. We'll get them to safety." As the shuttles returned to the human vessel, Elise steeled herself for what she knew they would find. The Vanguard's crew had discovered a grim scene. Bodies drifting in zero gravity, the once proud alien ship reduced to a lifeless husk. She met the survivors in the medbay, her heart sinking at the sight of their haunted, hollow eyes. "What happened out there?" she asked gently. A young woman, her once vibrant uniform stained with blood, stepped forward. They just left us to die," she choked out, her voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. "The consortium abandoned us." Elise felt a surge of outrage at the woman's words. The consortium. But they're our allies. They would never. "That's what we thought too." The woman's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening. "But when the Zolarians attacked, they fled, left us to fend for ourselves." Elise felt her blood run cold. The Zolarians were a ruthless, expansionist race, known for their savage tactics and complete disregard for civilian life. The fact that the consortium had abandoned their own people to such a fate was unthinkable. "How many of you are there?" she asked, dreading the answer. The woman's gaze dropped to the floor. "Just me. The rest." Her voice broke, and she shook her head, unable to finish the sentence. Elise's heart ached for the young survivor, and for all the souls lost to this senseless tragedy. She placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I promised you we will not rest until we've uncovered the truth," she said, her voice laced with determination. "The consortium will answer for this." The woman looked up, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. She would ensure that the consortium's betrayal did not go unpunished. This was a grave injustice that demanded justice, and she would see to it that the universe understood the true strength and resilience of the human spirit. The mood aboard the human vessel was somber as Elise convened a meeting of her senior staff. The horrific news of the consortium's abandonment of their own people had sent shockwaves through the crew, and she could see the anger and determination etched on their faces. "We need to act quickly," Elise began, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging within her. "The Zolarians are a ruthless enemy, and they won't hesitate to finish off any survivors." Her first officer, Commander Michael Petrov, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in thought. "We're too far from the nearest consortium outpost to mount a full-scale rescue mission. It would take us days to get there, and by then—" He trailed off, the unspoken words hanging heavy in the air. Elise nodded grimly. "Exactly. Which is why we need to act now. I want all available shuttles and small craft prepped for immediate departure. We'll divide into teams and search the wreckage for any other survivors." The assembled officers exchanged uneasy glances. Captain, with all due respect, "That's an incredibly risky proposition," said the chief engineer, her voice laced with concern. "The Zolarians could be lurking nearby, waiting to ambush us. And even if we do find survivors, how are we going to get them all back to the ship safely?" Elise's jaw tightened. "I'm well aware of the risks, Lieutenant. But we can't just abandon these people to their fate. They're counting on us." The engineer hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Understood, Captain. We'll get the shuttles ready." As the meeting adjourned, Elise felt a strong hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Michael's gaze fixed on her, his expression one of unwavering support. "You know I've got your back, Elise," he said quietly. "We all do. These people need us, and we're not going to let them down." Elise managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Michael. I know this is a risky mission, but I have to believe we can pull it off." "We will," he said firmly. "The Zolarians may have numbers on their side, but they don't know the true strength of the human spirit. We'll show them what we're made of." Elise nodded, her resolve hardening. "Then let's get to it. The sooner we can get those survivors back to the ship, the better." As the crew sprung into action, Elise watched them with a mixture of pride and trepidation. She knew the risks they were taking, but she also knew that they were the best and brightest the human race had to offer. If anyone could pull off this daring rescue, it would be them. With a deep breath, Elise turned and headed for the shuttle bay, her mind racing with 1,000 contingencies and strategies. The Zolarians may have the numbers, but the humans had something far more powerful. A burning desire to right a grave injustice and save their fellow beings, no matter the cost. This was a fight they could not and would not lose. The shuttles emerged from the human vessel, their engines burning bright against the inky blackness of space. Elise gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white, as she watched the tiny craft dart towards the drifting alien wreckage. "Status report," she barked, her eyes never leaving the viewscreen. "All shuttles have docked with the Vanguard," the first officer reported, his voice tense. "No sign of Zolarian activity yet, but sensors are picking up a lot of interference from the damaged systems." Elise nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Keep a close eye on that. We can't afford any surprises." The minutes ticked by in agonizing silence as the rescue teams scoured the Vanguard's battered hull. Elise's heart raced with each passing second, her mind conjuring up 1,000 possible scenarios. The Zolarians launching a surprise attack, the Vanguard's life support failing, the rescue teams becoming stranded on the derelict ship. Finally, the comm crackled to life. "Captain Winters, this is Lieutenant Sato. We found 8 survivors, all in critical condition. Requesting immediate medical evac." Elise let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Understood, Lieutenant. Prepare the survivors for transport. My team will rendezvous with you shortly." As the shuttles raced back to the human vessel, Elise steeled herself for the grim task ahead. The survivors were in dire straits, their bodies battered and their spirits broken. She knew they would need all the medical care and emotional support the crew could provide. But even as she braced herself for the trauma they had endured, a growing sense of unease gnawed at the back of her mind. Something didn't feel right. "Petrov, keep a close eye on our sensors," she murmured to her first officer. "I have a bad feeling about this." Michael's brow furrowed with concern, but he nodded without question. "Aye, Captain. I'll have the team on full alert." As the shuttles docked, Elise rushed to the medbay, her heart pounding in her chest. The sight that greeted her was a harrowing one. The 8 survivors, their faces etched with pain and exhaustion, were being tended to by the medical staff. Elise moved to the bedside of the young woman she had spoken to earlier, the one who had recounted the consortium's betrayal. The woman's eyes were closed, her breathing shallow, but Elise could see the determination etching her features. "Hold on," Elise murmured, gently squeezing the woman's hand. "You're safe now. We're going to get you home." The woman's eyes fluttered open, and Elise was struck by the raw determination she saw there. "Captain, you have to go back, the woman rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. There are others. We can't leave them behind. Elise felt a chill run down her spine. Others? How many? The woman's expression grew pained. I don't know. But we can't abandon them. Not like the consortium did. Elise's jaw tightened, her mind racing. She knew the risks, the dangers, the possibility of a Zolarian ambush. But she also knew that she couldn't turn her back on those who needed them most. We'll go back, she said, her voice firm. I promise. The woman's lips curved into a faint smile, and Elise felt a surge of determination. This was a fight they couldn't afford to lose. As the shuttles prepared to depart once more, Elise could feel the tension palpable on the bridge. Her crew knew the risks, but they also knew that leaving anyone behind was not an option. All teams ready, Captain, Michael reported, his expression grim. We'll cover as much ground as we can, but the Vanguard is a big ship. There's no telling how many more survivors we might find. Elise nodded, her mind racing with contingencies and strategies. We'll have to work quickly and efficiently. The Zolarians could be lurking nearby, waiting to strike. Understood, Michael replied, his hand tightening on the edge of the console. We'll be on high alert. But if there are still people out there who need our help. He let the unspoken words hang in the air, and Elise knew they were both thinking the same thing. They couldn't abandon those in need, no matter the cost. Launch the shuttles, Elise commanded, her voice ringing with authority. And may the gods be with us. The tiny craft surged forward, their engines burning bright against the void. Elise watched them go, her heart pounding in her chest. This was a gamble, she knew, but one they had to take. As the shuttles neared the Vanguard, the crew braced themselves for the worst. The once proud vessel was a battered, lifeless husk, its hull breached in multiple places. Elise could feel the tension radiating from her team, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the Zolarians. Sensors are picking up movement, the first officer reported, his voice tense. Multiple contacts, closing fast. Elise's jaw tightened. Launch defensive countermeasures. We need to buy the rescue teams some time. The hewn vessel erupted in a dazzling display of weapons fire, its cannons blazing away at the approaching Zolarian ships. Elise watched the battle unfold, her heart in her throat, as the tiny shuttles darted back and forth, scouring the Vanguard's devastated interior for any signs of life. Suddenly, a crackle of static broke through the chaos. Captain Winters, this is Lieutenant Sato. We found more survivors, but we're pinned down. Requesting immediate evac, the Zolarian's air. The comm went silent, and Elise felt a chill run down her spine. Lieutenant Sato, come in, she shouted, her voice laced with panic. Damn it, what's happening out there? Michael's face was etched with grim determination. We're routing all available shuttles to their coordinates. We can't leave them behind. Elise nodded, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen as the human vessel continued its desperate battle against the Zolarian onslaught. The stakes had never been higher, and she knew that the fate of those survivors, and perhaps the entire galaxy, rested on their shoulders. Hold on, Lieutenant, she murmured, her hands clenched into tight fists. We're coming. The shuttles raced towards the Vanguard, their pilots pushing their craft to their limits. Elise held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest, as she watched the drama unfold. The Zolarians were relentless, their ships swarming the tiny human craft like a pack of hungry predators. But the humans were not to be deterred. They fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a refusal to abandon their own. And as the rescue teams emerged from the Vanguard, their precious cargo in tow, the least knew that this was a battle they could not, and would not lose. The shuttles raced back to the human vessel, their pilots pushing their craft to the limit. Elise watched with bated breath as the tiny craft dodged and weaved, evading the Zolarian onslaught. Status report, she barked, her eyes glued to the viewscreen. The rescue teams have all returned to the shuttles. Michael reported, his voice strained. They've got 12 survivors, but they're taking heavy fire. Elise's jaw tightened. Get those shuttles back here now. We can't hold off the Zolarians forever. The hewn vessel unleashed a barrage of weapons fire, its cannons blazing away at the Zolarian ships. But the alien forces were relentless, their ships swarming the tiny human craft like a pack of hungry predators. Elise felt a surge of desperation as she watched the shuttles fight their way through the chaos. The stakes had never been higher, and she knew that they couldn't afford to lose a single one. Finally, the shuttles docked with the human vessel, their pilots and passengers weary but triumphant. Elise rushed to the medbay, her heart pounding in her chest. The sight that greeted her was a grim one. The 12 survivors were in critical condition, their bodies battered and their spirits broken. Elise felt a lump in her throat as she surveyed the devastation, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. What happened out there? She asked the young woman she had spoken to earlier, her voice laced with concern. The woman's eyes were haunted, her expression a mix of grief and rage. The Zolarians. They just kept coming, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We tried to fight them off, but there were too many. They just wouldn't stop. Elise felt a chill run down her spine. And the others, the ones you told me about. The woman's face crumpled, and Elise knew the answer before she spoke. They didn't make it, the woman choked out, her shoulders shaking with sobs. We couldn't save them. Elise felt a wave of anguish wash over her. These were her people, her responsibility, and she had failed them. She reached out and gently grasped the woman's hand, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm so sorry, she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. We did everything we could. The woman nodded, her expression one of bitter resignation. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it still hurts, knowing that they're gone. Elise nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of their loss. She knew that the survivors would need time and care to heal, both physically and emotionally. But the more pressing concern was the Zolarian threat. As she turned to leave the medbay, she caught Michael's eye. The grim set of his jaw told her that he shared her concerns. We need to get these people to safety and fast, he said, his voice low. The Zolarians won't stop until they've finished the job. Elise nodded, her mind racing with 1,000 contingencies. Set a course for the nearest consortium outpost. We'll need their help to get these survivors the medical attention they need. Michael hesitated, his expression troubled. And what about the Zolarians? We can't just leave them to their mercy. Elise's jaw tightened, her eyes hardening with determination. We won't. We'll deal with the Zolarians, but first we need to make sure these people survive. It was a heavy burden to bear, but Elise knew that she had no choice. The lives of those survivors depended on her, and she would do whatever it took to ensure their safety. The hewn vessel raced through the void, its engines burning bright against the endless darkness of space. Elise stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the distant stars, her mind consumed by the weight of their mission. ETA to the nearest consortium outpost, she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. 2 hours, 37 minutes, Michael replied, his expression grim. The survivors are holding on, but their condition is still critical. Elise nodded, her jaw tightening. And the Zolarians. Still on our tail, Michael reported, his hands moving swiftly over the console. They're dogging our every move, but they haven't launched another attack yet. Elise pursed her lips, her brow furrowed in thought. They're waiting for us to let our guard down. We can't give them that opportunity. Michael's gaze hardened. Agreed. I've got our weapons teams on high alert, and the shields are at maximum. Good, Elise said, her voice clipped. The last thing we need is to be ambushed while we're trying to get these people to safety. As the minutes ticked by, the tension on the bridge was palpable. Elise could feel the eyes of her crew upon her, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and determination. They all knew the stakes, the risks, and the consequences of failure. Suddenly, a warning klaxon blared to life, and Elise felt her blood run cold. "Captain, sensors are detecting multiple Zolarian ships closing in," the first officer shouted, his voice laced with urgency. Elise's jaw tightened. All hands, battle stations, helm, evasive maneuvers. The hewn vessel lurched as the pilot executed a series of sharp turns and dives, the Zolarian ships in hot pursuit. Elise gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white, as the bridge erupted in a flurry of activity. Shields holding, but they won't last much longer. Michael reported, his brow furrowed in concentration. Elise's mind raced, searching for a solution. They couldn't outrun the Zolarians, and they couldn't afford to take another direct hit. They needed to buy themselves some time, some way to escape the onslaught. "Launch a full barrage of missiles," she commanded, her voice firm. "Target their engines and weapon systems. We need to cripple them. Buy us some breathing room." The hewn vessel unleashed a devastating salvo of missiles, the air around them crackling with the energy of the attack. Elise watched with bated breath as the projectiles streaked towards their targets, punching through the Zolarian ship's defenses. "Direct hits," the first officer reported, a note of triumph in his voice. "Several Zolarian ships are disabled, the rest are breaking off their pursuit." Elise felt a surge of relief, but she knew their respite would be short-lived. "Helm, maximum warp. Get us to that consortium outpost now." The hewn vessel surged forward, its engines straining as it pushed the limits of its speed. Elise stared out at the endless void, her mind consumed by the gravity of their situation. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Zolarians were relentless, and the consortium's betrayal had left them vulnerable. Elise knew that they would need to rally every ounce of human ingenuity and resolve if they were to have any hope of emerging victorious. And she was determined to do whatever it took to ensure that they did. The hewn vessel docked with the consortium outpost, its crew weary but determined. Elise led the way as they rushed the injured survivors to the medical facilities, her mind racing with 1,000 different thoughts. As the medical staff tended to the survivors, Elise pulled Michael aside, her expression grave. "We need to have a meeting with the consortium officials as soon as possible," she said, her voice low. "I want answers, and I won't rest until I get them." Michael nodded, his own face hardening with resolve. "Agreed. This betrayal is unforgivable, and we can't let them sweep it under the rug." Elise's jaw tightened. "Exactly. The consortium owes us an explanation, and they're going to give it to us. No more excuses, no more lies." Within the hour, Elise and her senior staff found themselves before a panel of consortium officials, their faces etched with a mixture of unease and defiance. "Captain Winters, your actions in rescuing those survivors were commendable," one of the officials said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But you must understand, the situation on the Vanguard was complicated." Elise's eyes narrowed, her patience wearing thin. "Complicated. The consortium abandoned its own people to die, and you call that complicated?" The official shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You must understand, the Zolarians posed a grave threat to our entire sector. We had to prioritize the safety of our core worlds." Michael stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "At the expense of your own citizens? That's not prioritizing, that's betrayal." The official's gaze hardened. "We made a difficult decision, Commander Petrov. One that was necessary for the greater good." Elise felt a surge of fury rise within her. The greater good. Tell that to the families of those who died, left to the mercy of the Zolarians. The official's lips tightened into a thin line. "Captain Winters, I understand your outrage, but you must understand the realities off." "Realities?" Elise interrupted, her voice dripping with scorn. "The only reality I see is that the consortium abandoned its own people, and then tried to cover it up." The official's eyes narrowed. "Captain, I would advise you to choose your words carefully. You are treading on dangerous ground. Elise leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. I'm not afraid of your threats or your excuses. The consortium will answer for what it has done, and I intend to see that justice is served. The official's face darkened with anger, but before he could respond, the doors to the chamber burst open. A young officer rushed in, his face pale with urgency. Sirs, we've just received an emergency transmission from one of our outer colonies, he gasped. The Zolarians are launching a full-scale invasion. The room erupted into chaos, the consortium officials exchanging panicked glances. Elise felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the gravity of the situation. The Zolarians were on the move, and the consortium was woefully unprepared to face them. Elise knew that they couldn't afford to sit back and let the consortium's failures play out. It was time to take matters into their own hands. Ready the ship, she barked, her voice cutting through the din. We're going to war. The human vessel surged through the void, its engines burning bright as it raced towards the embattled consortium colony. Elise stood on the bridge, her face set with grim determination. Status report, she demanded, her eyes sweeping across the console. We're closing in on the colony, Captain, Michael reported, his fingers flying across the controls. Sensor scans show the Zolarian fleet is already engaging our forces. They're being outmatched and outgunned. Elise's jaw tightened. Then we'll have to even the odds. Helm, take us in, full speed ahead. Weapons, prepare to engage the enemy. The bridge erupted into a flurry of activity as the crew sprang into action. Elise watched with bated breath as the human vessel surged forward, its cannons blazing away at the Zolarian ships. The battle was fierce and unforgiving, the Zolarians unleashing a relentless barrage of firepower upon the consortium forces. But the human vessel fought with a ferocity born of desperation and a burning desire for justice. Captain, the consortium ships are taking heavy damage, Michael shouted over the din of the battle. We need to provide them with cover, or they won't stand a chance. Elise's eyes narrowed. Understood. All available firepower, concentrate on the Zolarian capital ships. We need to break their momentum. The human vessel unleashed a devastating salvo of missiles and plasma blasts, its weapons tearing through the Zolarian fleet with ruthless efficiency. Elise watched as the enemy ships buckled under the onslaught, their once formidable defenses crumbling in the face of the human onslaught. Their capital ships are breaking off, Captain, the first officer reported, his voice tinged with triumph. The consortium forces are rallying, they've gained the upper hand. Elise felt a surge of relief, but she knew that the battle was far from over. Maintain position, keep the pressure on. We can't let them regroup. As the battle raged on, Elise couldn't help but marvel at the sheer tenacity and skill of her crew. They fought with a ferocity that defied their numerical disadvantage, their weapons and tactics honed to a razor's edge. And then, as if by divine intervention, the tide of the battle began to turn. The Zolarian fleet, battered and demoralized, began to retreat, their ships fleeing into the void. Elise watched as the consortium forces cheered and celebrated their hard-won victory, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and pride. But as she surveyed the carnage around them, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow. Casualties? She asked, her voice somber. Michael's expression darkened. Significant, I'm afraid. The consortium took a beating, but they held their ground. Elise nodded, her heart heavy. And the Vanguard survivors? Stable, but they're still in critical condition, Michael replied. The medical teams are doing everything they can. Elise's jaw tightened. Good. We need to get them to a proper medical facility as soon as possible. As the human vessel prepared to depart, Elise couldn't help but look back at the battered consortium ships, their hulls scared and their crews weary. She knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger conflict, one that would test the limits of human endurance and resilience. But she also knew that the human spirit was unbreakable, and that they would rise to meet the challenge, no matter the cost. This was a fight it could not and would not lose.